All right, so this is part two. So picking up where we left off was on page 16. And we were looking at non-pharmaceutical interventions, where they're claiming that non-pharmaceutical interventions did not confer significant benefits in terms of case growth, and that similar reductions may be achieved with less restrictive interventions. So they were talking about the R effective number and this model, this SEIR model, which is, let's scroll back up, SEIR. Here we go. Which is susceptibility, exposure, infection, and recovery, which is neglecting the fact that people that get long COVID are not technically recovered, or people that have post-COVID complications, which is separate from long COVID. So that's what that model is. And then where we left off, similarly, a meta-analysis conducted on lockdowns in the spring of 2020. So again, they're looking at 2020 data, where in 2024, we should be looking at more recent data. And they say that this study, that their meta-analysis, that they're not really referencing, they're not showing authors, they're not showing what the citation is. They're saying this unknown study showed little to no effect on COVID-19 mortality, so death. On the other hand, age-adjusted charts from multiple European nations do echo the early Chinese claims, showing the same stalling or reversing of overall case growth during the dependency of the lockdown. This begs the question, assuming the Chinese and European case growth data is accurate, is a lockdown that merely postpones case growth a worthwhile endeavor? And to answer that question, yes, obviously. So if you look at US, and so let's actually do that. So let's go to the World Health Organization's thing. They have a new dashboard. Just to show you, because this COVID started in China. So if you're going straight on a growth perspective, like it originated there, they technically should have the highest number of cases. But when we look at total cumulative, they're the second most. So you would expect China to be at the top, but they aren't. They're, from last reporting, they're 11 million essentially behind, or sorry, not 11, that's 5 million behind the United States. And that's with everyone essentially stopping reporting. But like, the question is just irrelevant because obviously you want to stop the spread and stop the growth of disease from occurring in a population, because it's going to have direct, if you slow down the growth, it's going to have direct impacts. It's going to save lives. People aren't going to die that would have died if you didn't slow the growth. People are going to get long COVID that wouldn't have got long COVID if you slowed the growth. There's less chance of mutation when you're slowing the growth. So there's more of a chance that you can vaccinate the population, you can get these things built up so that you're essentially saving lives and preventing people from becoming disabled. It just doesn't make sense. So yes, to their dumb question, it is a worthwhile endeavor. So moving on to collateral consequences. So in order to comprehensively answer that question, we must examine the significant collateral consequences of lockdowns which lie outside the boundaries of SEIR-based analyses. Again, the US only had a stay-at-home order for about 3 weeks. So first, one must consider the underlying economics. Lockdowns have been accurately called a luxury of the laptop class. I've never heard anyone say that. And the benefits of these non-pharmaceutical something inure to the population who can afford to stay at home, not to the essential workers who cannot. Inure. Is that a word? Come on, come back. Accustomed to something unpleasant. No evidence, just vibes. Seriously. So luxury of the laptop class, blah blah blah. Not pharmaceutical inventions, in order to the population who can afford to stay at home, not to the essential workers who cannot. The result is an incoming class stratification that sees COVID spread well controlled among certain income strata, while case growth remains rampant in others. Case growth data from low versus high income neighborhoods during the pandemic clearly demonstrates this distinction. But again, there was about a 3-week period of stay at home orders. They're saying that like during lockdowns, there is this class stratification where lower income people are going to be hit harder by this than higher income people when essential workers. So if we think about essential workers, that's going to be like the people that are at the grocery store, people that are like your DoorDash drivers, people that operate highway roads, police, hospital workers, etc. So that's our essential personnel. So it's a pretty stratified group of people who are essential workers. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's income, like there's one specific group that is being forced into this. Like I think it's pretty equivalent across the spectrum. And then again, like their argument doesn't make sense because they're saying that lockdowns are unfair to people that have low income because these people that have low income are more likely to be essential workers, which isn't the case. The majority of like the essential personnel were hospital workers, which would be much higher income. And that contributes to spread within those communities. But the data pool that they would be looking at again is 3 weeks, and they're referencing the entire pandemic. And you can't evaluate 3 weeks versus 5 years, or 4 complete years going on 5 years. So again, this is they keep breaking. Their logic doesn't logic. It keeps breaking very easily. So again, nothing was said there. This is to say nothing of the overall impact. Oh yeah, I should probably highlight some stuff. Sorry about that. So and then this is to say nothing of the overall impact of reduced economic activity in first world countries like the United States and in Europe on other areas of the world. While many American workers, especially small business owners and those in the service sector, certainly felt the economic brunt of lockdown-related business closures, the CARES Act did provide United States citizens with at least some economic protection. I think we got $600, $400, and then another 600 maybe. I don't remember the CARE Act doing a lot for us. By contrast, many third world countries with more precarious economic prospects suffered far worse consequences or not able to provide similar benefits. Pandemic-related economic depression produced a marked increase in extreme poverty, the number of people living on less than $1.90 a day. And again, so this is done in the perspective of the United States. So right now they're bringing it into global, in talking about people that are living in extreme poverty, because they're referencing third world countries here, and talking about extreme poverty, but that doesn't have any application on lockdowns in the United States. While I agree low-income individuals are less likely to be able to do remote work, they still face less transmission risk during stay-at-home orders. Yeah, I agree. So their argument didn't make sense. The statistic had been declining for years before it spiked in 2020. As of 2022, the number had returned to the same levels it had been in 2018, but almost 5 years of worldwide declining poverty had been erased. Similar effects were observed on the global food supply, where food shortages associated with COVID-19 related economic fallout have been modeled to have contributed thousands of deaths. Interestingly, these were false shortages. Eggs is a really good example where the manufacturers of eggs took advantage of the COVID pandemic to actually mark up their egg prices, even though there's no supply issues. So they actually have this huge thing in court right now where they're discussing that very thing, how the egg manufacturers basically 2.5 times marked up the price of eggs for no reason. They going from like $1.99, $2.99 to what we currently see in stores, which is between $4.99 and $6.99. That's US dollars. So this statistic is declining, blah, 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 where food shortages associated with COVID-19 related economic fallout. So again, a lot of this is actually manufactured. This is not a direct result of COVID. A lot of this is manufactured. One of the things that actually did happen was the Suez Canal that got backed up during COVID. That was a huge transport issue, but that was because the ship somehow got stuck sideways. I don't even remember how that happened, but that hit all sorts of different sectors. That was an actual issue, but again, not really related to COVID itself. So likewise, global vaccination programs have seen the largest decline in childhood vaccinations in the last 30 years. That is due to misinformation and disinformation, such as what's being reported here in this grand jury report, this interim grand jury report from Florida. So that's due to them, resulting in a resurgence of diseases like measles. Polio is another example that had previously all but disappeared. Clearly, the pandemic itself was going to cause global disruption. Is it fair to say to lay these consequences at the foot of lockdowns alone? No, but they certainly didn't help. So that's funny. There's a little bit of self-acknowledgement here, where they're saying, okay, so we acknowledge that lockdowns didn't really cause all of these things that we just mentioned. So we just wanted to mention them just to mention them. But they certainly didn't help the problems. So I'm going to give that I agree with you. Thanks for being a little self-aware. So another aspect of lockdowns that deserves distinct consideration is that these non-pharmaceutical interventions effectively pause much of what would be considered routine healthcare, like checkups, physicals, other related screenings, and minor surgeries. So yeah, that's the big thing that happened, is that people did not and still do not trust hospitals to take precautionary measures to protect the people that they serve, their quote-unquote customers. Because they don't have universal masking mandates. They reluctantly enforce these, and they don't do it well. They do, right now, it's only on employees, it's not on patients as well. And if you're only one-way masking in hospitals, and you're not cleaning the air, you're not doing all these additional measures, it's not going to help too much. It's going to help definitely if the people actually wear the masks and wear them consistently, and you don't just have these random mask mandates for like 2 weeks and then say, we're good now, even though wastewater levels are still showing really high levels. We're talking about current stuff. But yeah, that's so that right now they're referring this into economic impacts is what their takeaway. I freaking guarantee it is what their takeaway is. But people are doing this for direct reasons. It's like since Christina's in the chat, she's been talking a lot about the Red Cross and blood donations, and the major reason that people aren't donating blood is because those spaces are not safe. The people that are donating blood don't consider those safe spaces to be safe, where they're protected because they're going to be sitting there in a room with no ventilated air. The phlebotomists that are going to be drawing blood from them are not wearing masks. They're not washing their hands. They're not doing all of these things that you would want them to do. There's no enforced masking and like widespread separation between patients, or like not patients, donors. So these places aren't safe, and these have direct economic impact. So yes, you should be investing in these things like masking, having universal masking mandates, increasing air precautions, and etc. Anyways, going back to critiquing this paper. So this is an important point because much of what one would consider routine is meant to detect conditions that could become serious in the future. A missed mammogram may be the difference between catching breast cancer at stage 1 versus stage 3 or 4. A routine checkup that would have revealed serious heart disease may be missed, resulting in a heart attack at some future date. These are thousands of potential scenarios, but even just these two adequately underscore our point. By pausing routine healthcare, lockdowns may have serious unintended and unanticipated health consequences. And again, it's not the lockdown. We didn't have a lockdown. It was 3 weeks. And the reason people weren't seeking the care in the 3 weeks is because the conditions, the public did not perceive the conditions as safe, and people still don't perceive the conditions as safe because these places are not doing adequate measures to protect the people they serve. So it's like it's a loop. It's that loop logic where circular logic. That's the word I'm looking for. Like you're saying, it wasn't a lockdown, you're correct, it was a suggestion to stay home. Yeah, then they say that in this document too, that it was a stay-at-home order, but they keep trying to pretend it was a lockdown, which is what they're saying here. And Christina says, exactly, most people that want to donate blood because no airborne precaution mitigation is in force. Won't because no airborne, yeah, exactly. So the circular logic is that lockdowns made it so that people didn't do their routine health screenings, which made it so that problems get worse, which made it so that people are dying or having other problems, when that's a false logic scenario. The actual logic scenario exists outside of that paradigm, which is people don't perceive the hospitals as safe. Hospitals aren't taking measures. People aren't going in because hospitals aren't taking measures because people don't perceive it as safe, to then the rest of it. So then it results in XYZ. So I guess it's technically not circular logic, but it's still like a circular pathway. And again, 3 weeks does not equate to year 5 now of the pandemic. So these collateral consequences will not be written in the language of SEIR, rather they will be written in the language of increased excess mortality, defined as the number of actual deaths over a given period of time versus the number of expected deaths that can persist for months or even years after a lockdown is lifted. According to actuarial estimates based on data released by the CDC, excess mortality was indeed well above the expected throughout the pandemic, even when COVID-related deaths were excluded. And a recent study was actually just published. I haven't read through it yet, but I'm excited to. That is actually showing that a lot of these deaths that were deemed natural causes in terms of the excess deaths were actually COVID deaths. So it's actually a dramatic undercount. However, I wouldn't expect that to be in this because it's accurate information and also is it's recent as of this year, 2024. So maybe they wouldn't have seen it if we're being super generous. So furthermore, excess mortality has remained dramatically higher through 2023 in all age groups, so it's typo there, in all age groups, which according to the IFR table, infection fatality rate, there we go, we presented above, are at a greatly decreased risk of illness and death from COVID infection. But again, if you're having this higher results in excess deaths, and the only change is COVID, then COVID is causing the issue. Again, that attributes people putting off care instead of hospitals and doctors being overwhelmed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it puts it, that's a good point. So again, that's like tying it back into this perception of individual responsibility as opposed to governmental or hospital responsibility, like a system's responsibility to be able to care for the public. That's what healthcare is. And they're saying like, oh, well, people are making a mistake and people are the problem. Well, no, the system's set up in a way that's making it so that people are seeing like, hey, this is not safe for my health. I'm going to abstain from this because I don't trust that if I go there, that I won't get this disease. These persistent excess deaths may not be attributable to physical health problems. Mental health also declined precipitously during the pandemic. The WHO estimated in 2022 that anxiety and depression increased by 25% between 2020 and 2021. There's interesting studies that I haven't gotten into yet on COVID actually affects the dopaminergic neural pathways. So it seems like it might decrease the release of dopamine, which would increase feelings of depression and anxiety. So even today, the National Institute of Health states that both, I don't know why they had to put the B in parentheses or brackets, both COVID and the COVID-19 pandemic have significantly affected the mental health of adults and children, describing that impact as follows. If you get COVID, you may experience a number of symptoms related to brain and mental health, including cognitive and attention deficits, anxiety and depression, psychosis, seizures, and suicidal behavior. That's interesting. I'm just scrolling up to see what this section was titled, to see if, like, because that sounds like an acknowledgement of long COVID in a way. Collateral consequences. That's something I'm going to want to look into, the increase in suicide. That's an interesting perspective I haven't thought about yet. Increase in suicidal behavior. So data suggested, I'm going to make that green because that's interesting. So data suggested that people are more likely to develop mental illness or disorders in the months following infection, including symptoms or post-traumatic stress disorder. People with long COVID, there it is, long COVID, may experiencing many symptoms related to brain function and mental health. Yes, because COVID impacts the brain, very well documented. We included this text because it aptly demonstrates one of the key problems with analyzing collateral consequences. It conflates the consequences of COVID with the consequences of our reaction to it. Interesting. Let's see what they mean by that. Is this grand jury really supposed to believe, as the text above suggests, that all the mental health symptoms described therein are attributed to the virus, while none of them are attributed to the fact? Okay, so here is where they slip up, because they're non-scientists that clearly have not stayed apt of current literature. So we'll just briefly go through it. So cognitive and attention deficits, the COVID impacts our brain pathways that actually will fuse our neurons together. We can have little blood clots that can pass through the blood-brain barrier, which is kind of surprising. The virus can also pass through the blood-brain barrier, cause neurons to fuse together, which causes them to misfire. So it causes pathways that have been established to become non-functional or reduced function. So that's one of the interesting things. Also, the cellular metabolism isn't as efficient anymore because of COVID existing in there, and the brain not being, like, the brain's actually pretty good at clearing itself out, but it's not good at clearing COVID out of the brain. So the immune reaction to try and clear that out creates a metabolic chain reaction, which causes issues. And the recent findings on the dopaminergic pathways, which can result in increase in depression and anxiety. There's been a huge association with increases in psychosis, specifically bipolar disorder. Seizures have been well documented, especially in children and infants from COVID-infected mothers in the second and third trimester, but also young children. Some adults, but mostly this is in the younger population that we're seeing the seizures from the COVID infection. The suicidal behavior, I don't know what they're referring to there. I know that suicide, Crushes and Spice has done a whole series on this, which is very interesting, about how suicide rates have increased dramatically in our country. So that's not something I've thought about or looked into yet with its relation to COVID, so I'd be interested in seeing that. But again, we have to remember that when they're talking about lockdowns, it's a stay-at-home order. It was not enforced in any way. People weren't trapped in their homes with food being shipped to them. People could go out, people could get groceries, people could do things. It was not a real lockdown. It was only 3 weeks long. And that small period of time at the very beginning in the US, so in 2020, early 2020 will not have a long-term effect on year 2020, the rest of 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, and now 2024. So the heavy-handed government-mandated lockdowns, stay-at-home orders. So like it's funny that they're using both of these in the same sentence because they're trying to conflate it to make people think like it's the government did two different things, but really they're saying that stay-at-home orders were equivalent to lockdowns, which we did not do. And school closures, schools were temporarily closed, but again, that also shifted to remote learning. So like it was still in session in a lot of ways. I think that turned around really rapidly, if I'm recalling correctly. So when they're trying to say that this turned people's lives upside down for the better part of 3 years, that's just factually inaccurate. They're equating they're saying that they're basically in this sentence, they're implying that all of this happened over the course of 3 years. The stay-at-home order happened for 3 weeks, did not happen for 3 years. The 3 years is the designation from 2020 to 2023, which is when the public health emergency was declared in the United States. I don't remember the exact start date, but I know the end date was May 11th of 2023, last year. So that's what they're defining as the 3 years. But again, these things happened at different times. Schools were opened back up completely in 2021 with no bars held, no holds barred. I don't remember the saying. But that was the big thing that Rochelle Walensky did, was making sure that all schools were 100% open, in-person learning, getting butts back in seats in 2021. So again, that didn't happen for the long term. The lockdowns never happened. The stay-at-home orders only happened for 3 weeks. They were not universally enforced throughout the United States. So this is all a series of conflations. So that surmise not only offends common sense, it also contradicted by CDC data from June of 2020. So June of 2020, again, why are they focused so much on 2020 data? That's the time when you have the highest level of uncertainty. When an event starts, you gain more certainty over time. We still have pretty high levels of uncertainty, but the reason they're focusing really heavily on this 2020 data is because that's when the highest ranges and the most uncertainty and the lowest levels for things like transmission occurred. So it's always something to keep in the back of your mind when you're reading articles like this, knowing that it's written in 2024. So when a cross-section of Americans reported dramatically increased levels of anxiety, depression, and PTSD at a time when at most 1 out of 20 of them had contracted COVID, but when non-pharmaceutical interventions across the nation had already been in place for months. But again, these non-pharmaceutical interventions were not enforced. You didn't go to jail for not wearing a mask. You had people that weren't wearing masks or refusing to wear masks, that were wearing neck gaiters, which are not equivalent to masks in any way, shape, or form. So again, they're heavily focused on the very beginning of the pandemic, when the numbers were low, and they're trying to use this as an argument to say that non-pharmaceutical interventions didn't work because they didn't prevent the spread of the disease and they didn't contain the disease, which is faulty logic, because you have all of these things that are not being truly enforced. In the same vein, drug abuse deaths rose precipitously during the pandemic. No one has yet attempted to blame those on COVID virus itself, but they would fall squarely within the realm of the collateral consequence of lockdowns, in that those deaths often tend to follow hand in glove with mental health issues. That's a huge logical leap. They're saying that lockdowns turn people to drug abuse. They're saying that 3 weeks, yeah, no worries, Christina. They're saying that 3 weeks of stay-at-home orders turned people to drug abuse and caused massive spikes in deaths due to drug overdoses. So again, huge mental gym. That's mental gymnastics. That's a huge leap, huge logical leap. Yeah, seriously. So once again, CDC data shows deaths relating to substance abuse rising beginning in early 2020 and only beginning to level out, but still rising in 2022. Okay, like the thing is like when people get when like crazy stuff happens, because there hasn't just been COVID. There's been lots and lots and lots of things that have been happening in the bad sector of life. Um, so it's like when those things happen, people turn to things like alcohol. They turn to things like smoking, cigarettes, um, and other sorts of drugs to try and give themselves a sense of control and um, happy feelings, depending on it, what it is. Um, so like that's been well established. It happens during any sort of crisis. So again, I don't think that you can make this mental jump from 3 weeks of containment resulted in huge drug spikes for a year and a half after when these containment practices happened. It doesn't make sense. The final collateral consequences we wish to place on the scale are those related to one of the most controversial facets of lockdowns, school closures. One analytical model from a peer-reviewed journal, what article, concluded that there was a median of 54 days of school instruction lost by children in the United States, age 5 to 11 during 2020. So since we're throwing out numbers, a recent study showed that from COVID illnesses, people on average miss about 84 days of work. So being sick and being out for being sick will directly cause even more days of missed schooling. I think for schools specifically, I remember that there was like an average of somewhere between 72 and 103 days of learning loss from illness. So again, like you're saying that learning loss is more important than the long-term health of these children. And we know that children can get COVID, like long COVID. They're under the same factors that we have. They get like the disease and it can cause other issues, just like it can in adults. And that's like one of the big issues is even to this day, people are still not recognizing that children get the impacts and the effects of COVID just as severely, if not perhaps more severely, than adults do. So this might be a conservative estimate, and we plan to gather further empirical anecdotal evidence. Why would you get anecdotal evidence when you can get empirical evidence? Like, I don't care about your little quotes about the collateral impacts of school closures, and if necessarily provide a deeper analysis of their consequences in a future presentment. We include the concept here because school closures are perhaps the most important collateral consequences of lockdown, and we did not wish to ignore their impact, even if that impact is difficult at this point to quantify in our analysis. And in my opinion, it's the greatest tragedy when we look back in history when Rochelle Lewinsky was tasked with by Biden in 2021 to reopen schools and get kids back and like butts back in seats. We're going to look back to that and say, what did we do? We can make up for lost classroom time. We can't go back when people become disabled. Yep, exactly, Emmy. And some parents have complained about having to pick up their kids. You'd have to say more about that. I'm not sure what you're referring to. But as we gather and examine these consequences, an analogy starts to merge. A government-mandated lockdown is like a credit card. It allows leaders to buy a period of depressed case growth, but that benefit is temporary and ends when the lockdown is lifted. The interest of this benefit, written in the language of excess mortality, is paid for in future months and years of economic hardship and mental and physical health consequences and loss of educational attainment. So we can break that down because all of that is not true. So we actually saw that there were no economic losses, especially with supplements from the government. We actually had like everything hit margins and actually exceeded margins in many different categories. So the economy actually did very well during the pandemic, during what the government considers the pandemic. The pandemic's still ongoing, but what the government considers the pandemic, when we have our retrospective analyses, the economic hardships do not exist. It was very well. The physical and health consequences, they didn't define what those consequences would be in terms of physical health consequences for lockdowns. Maybe you gain a little weight because of those 3 weeks that you couldn't go to the gym, or because I know people, like, there were tons and tons of like gyms that did these things like it was like this weird underground gym network that I saw emerge during that period of time where people would just like go over to this gym, like their gym bro's house, and work out anyways with all of their equipment. And I saw like gyms have like secret openings and stuff. So like in terms of physical health consequences of a stay-at-home order, I don't see anything there. The mental health consequences we already talked about; those were directly due to COVID, not from a 3-week stay-at-home order. Loss of educational attainment. I think that it doesn't really matter for like the 3 weeks or whatever that it took teachers to be able to switch to virtual and switch to that. I think the biggest issues that we saw were things like getting students laptops and making sure that everyone had internet access, things like that. And then having teachers shift curriculum from in-person learning to the virtual learning model, which we should have already been doing anyways, but it's not, I'm not convinced because for example, like they've done lots of interesting studies where over the summer essentially students will forget everything they learned in the previous year. So for the first month and a half of school, you're essentially reteaching the kids what they had already learned the previous year before you build on. Is how all of the elementary and early high school teachers have explained it to me. So I think a 3 week, like a month lost period of education is not that hard, especially when you like take those types of things into consideration. And we can always regain back education, doing accelerated models, doing additional summer learnings, or just accepting like, hey, this thing happened, and building in a window of tolerance, or figuring out some accelerated plans for additional grade levels so that you can regain what was lost in the prior grade level. Like there's models and ways that you can compensate for this. It just doesn't truly make sense. So no one understood this relationship more clearly than one of the world's most famous epidemiologists, Dr. Donald Henderson. I'd be interested if someone looked that up. I'm just gonna highlight this to look this person up later, to see if they're actually a good epidemiologist or if they're a notorious epidemiologist. But let's see what their quote says. Widely credited with eradicating smallpox, Henderson had this to say about large-scale quarantines in 2006. As experience shows, there's no basis for recommending quarantine, either at groups or individuals. So yeah, this person's probably not a well-known epidemiologist. The problem is implementing such measures are formidable, and secondary effects of absenteeism and community disruption, as well as possible adverse consequences such as loss of public trust in government and stigmatization of quarantined people and groups are likely to be considered. So I'm gonna look this person up in my free time when I do the follow-up video to this, because it sounds like this person doesn't know what they're talking about. Sweden let it rip and now have lots of brain health issues. Yeah, and that's what we're gonna see throughout lots of the population. which is scary. Somehow, because of panic, hubris, and aptitude, or some unfortunate combination of the three, this widely rejected idea was not only made its way back into scientific discourse in 2020, it became the law of land in most of the United States between 2020 and 2022. It is clear to this grand jury that whatever benefits from these mandates, they were not worth the price. Again, there was no price. There was no price. Donald Henderson died in 2016. Cool. But again, the economy did not falter. There was no issues. There were no issues. Anywho, the use of masks and social distancing. As of the writing of this interim presentment, the CDC provides the following key messages on using face masks to prevent or limit the spread of the COVID virus. Masking is a critical public health tool for preventing spread of COVID-19. It is important to remember that any mask is better than no mask. To protect yourself and others from COVID-19, CDC continues to recommend that you wear the most protective mask you can that fits well and that you will wear consistently. Masks and respirators are effective at reducing transmission of COVID, the virus that causes COVID-19, when worn consistently and correctly. Some masks and respirators offer high levels of protection than others, and some may be harder to tolerate or wear consistently than others. It is important to wear a well-fitting mask or respirator correctly that is comfortable for you and that provides good protection. While all masks and respirators provide some level of protection, properly fitted respirators provide the highest level of protection. Wearing a highly protective mask or respirator may be most important for certain higher risk situations or by some people at increased risk for severe disease. CDC's mask recommendations provide information that people can use to improve how well their masks protect them. The substance of these recommendations has not been monolithic. In early 2020, the director of NIAID opined that masks would be ineffective at mitigating COVID infection. So we know at the beginning of the pandemic that Fauci and the government lied to us and that they were trying to conserve masks. So early on, they intentionally put out disinformation saying, hey, COVID is not airborne, it's droplet based, and we need these masks to be able to protect our healthcare workers because there's a shortage of these masks and we don't want the public using up the masks that we want to be providing for the healthcare workers. And then it was publicly acknowledged that yes, it is airborne and the public should be wearing face masks. So that's what it's referring to. So in May of 2021, the CDC temporarily reversed its cell phone mask in a now-deleted press release citing observational studies showing lower biotransmission among vaccinated individuals as grounds to reconsider its prior guidance, only to reiterate its previous recommendation in July of that year in another now-deleted press release. Okay, that's interesting. I would want to try and find those. But again, we know why they did that. They did that with an intention of making it so that the public would not panic buy out all of the masks so that we would have a shortage for healthcare workers because there was no stockpiles of masks and gowns and everything else. If you recall, way back to the beginning, healthcare workers were putting garbage bags on their bodies as pseudo gowns. And they were reusing face masks. They would get one face mask a week and things like that. So really that just shows the ineptitude of the government to stockpile appropriate healthcare equipment. And what's sad is that we're back in the same situation now because the PPE that was stockpiled and the masks that were stockpiled have expired in our national stockpiles for those things. So we're now actually back in the same situation. So really all this shows is the history of that right there. And yeah, so the CDC then made bad claims again by Rochelle Walensky saying that if you get vaccinated, you won't get sick, which is if you're not getting sick, then you wouldn't be transmitting, which is where that's coming into play. but that was poor CDC communication, and they have been heavily chastised for that. And I will chastise them again right now. Rochelle Walensky really messed up. So, like, there's some crumbs of truth into some of this, but that doesn't negate the fact of, like, you have to understand why those things happened. I don't agree with the actions that the CDC took at the time, especially Dr. Fauci leading that misinformation campaign or disinformation campaign. It was wrong. So anyways, continuing on, as the SARS-CoV-2 Delta variant began to show higher transmissibility among vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals, as of today, the key messages we cite above are part of a section entitled Types of Masks and Respirators, the first in a confusing multi-page labyrinth of advice which indicates it was last updated May 11th, 2023. To make these public health policies, so like that is an adequate critique of the CDC website, is that it is very convoluted. It will redirect you and it will circularly redirect you where you click on a link, it'll put you to a new page, you click that link, it'll bring you back to the same page. So it's a very poorly designed website. Yes, they were wildly effective for the original strains, but failed to foresee mutations. Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that like the vaccines were very good for, they were well targeted to the current variants in circulation at the time. But we were running on the principle that we're thinking, oh yeah, COVID's not going to mutate that frequently. We're like, it'll probably snuff itself out. Like, I don't like quoting Donald Trump, but Donald Trump was like, oh yeah, it'll just, one day it'll just go away, poof. And we know that didn't happen because COVID is an RNA virus and it has a unique ability to mutate incredibly rapidly. So much so that we had JN1 emerge on the scene in November of this year. And now it's February and it already has at least 8 major subvariants, which is ridiculous in terms of a mutation rate for a virus. So as the SARS-CoV-2 Delta variant began to show higher transmissibility among vaccinated and unvaccinated individuals, as of today, the key messages we cite above are part of a section entitled Types of Masks and Respirators, the first in a confusing multi-page labyrinth. Oh, I already read that part. So to make these public health policy recommendations, our understanding is that the CDC relies on 2 primary sources of scientific literature. 1, studies and trials published in major peer-reviewed journals, and 2, studies published in its own journal, Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report, MMWR. It is also our understanding that unlike major peer-reviewed journals, studies and trials published in MMWR are reviewed internally for rigor and accuracy by scientists and policymakers from the CDC. MMWR did publish several studies on masks in the early part of the pandemic. Here are the prominent examples. Absence of apparent transmission of COVID from 2 stylists after exposure at a hair salon, trends in county level COVID incidents, maximize fit for cloth and medical procedure masks. Okay, so they're just listing random studies. The Great Clips study was among the first published in MMWR, touting the utility of masking and preventing COVID transmission, which it does. It's been very well documented. We've known that masks have worked for a very long time. That's been very well established. N95 masks are the best. So involved 2 hairstylists who developed symptoms of COVID and continued servicing clients for several days while wearing cloth or surgical masks. And so what they're probably going to show is that cloths and surgical masks are not effective because they're not built for aerosol transmission. They're built for droplet transmission from being splashed. So typically, when we say droplet transmission, we're thinking of things like blood, of vomit, of things like that, where it would be larger and solid, and like if a blood would splash across your face, the surgical mask would prevent it from getting in your mouth or your nose. So that's what those are typically for. So when you're using a loose fit cloth mask or what people call a baggy blue loose fit surgical mask, those are not going to be protective as an N95 that's well fit to your face, very snug, because of the little vents on the side, possible vents on the nose, if they're wearing it down below their chin, things like that. There's lots and lots of different ways that these have a poor fit mask, and if they're not even using proper masking protocols. So All in all, they exposed a total of 139 clients to potential COVID transmission, but after a 2-week period, none of the clients developed COVID-19 symptoms. So they could have just gotten very lucky. Maybe they had the windows open. Maybe they had like fans going. Maybe they weren't even that whatever. But also, this is showing that the masks worked, even a loose-fitting mask, in preventing the symptoms. Because like when we're talking about total efficacy, efficiency, so like an N95 is a minimum of 95% particle filtration effectiveness. Cloth mask is around 50 to 60%. And a surgical mask is around 65%. So that 65% filtration was good enough to not infect these 139 clients, apparently. The surgical masks weren't designed to be protective, therefore source transmission. Yeah, they can be good for, they can be okay for source transmission, but they're still not going to be fantastic. But it's still like a 65% reduction in source transmission is much, much better than no reduction. Same with the cloth mask. A 50% reduction is better than no reduction. So from the perspective of a layperson, 139.0 looks compelling. It is compelling. Nobody got infected. What else is there to know? There is even a made-for-media infographic of 139 barber chairs interspersed with 2 hair dryers to underscore the findings. From a scientific perspective, however, the data is riddled with potential confounders. To begin with, there is no control group of people who had their hair cut by one of the 2 barbers who was not wearing a mask. Because 0 people developed symptoms, there's, oh cool, so it was also 2-way masking, which is also better. And also, so what they're suggesting here is highly unethical. So take a pause. So they're saying that there's no control group of the people like not wearing a mask. So when you're working with diseases, especially with diseases in people, and you're tracking this type of thing, having a control group like that is unethical. You can't experiment directly on people like that without some sort of written consent. And because the risk would outweigh the potential therapeutic benefits, because there would be no therapeutic benefits, it would be a direct experiment on these people where you'd be having that control group. That would be incredibly unethical, and you would not be allowed to do that type of study. So what they're suggesting, while it sounds correct from a statistics mindset, it's not something that would be done because it's not ethical. Because 0 people develop. So there's also no rate from which we can begin to determine the degree of protection afforded by the mask. That's not true. We have very good studies for filtration. It's about 60%. And because no one was PCR tested for COVID, the study does not account for potential asymptomatic. And that's a fair critique right there. So I'm gonna redo my highlights here. So we'll do red for that. And I'll give them this one because truly, like they knew about PCR testing at that point. They should have been doing PCR testing on those people, especially if they were tracking it. So that is actually a fair critique. Better than nothing, especially when everyone had one or most people. Yeah, definitely better than nothing. So this one's a fair critique. This would not be this control group suggestion. That's unethical. That would not be something that would be done. You can't experiment on people. You can, but you'd be put in jail. Even if there was a potential rate, there's an astounding number of confounders that could have dramatically influenced the outcome, dwarfing the impact of the masks, how well ventilated the area, how many clients requiring the use of a blow dryer, had some of the clients previously been infected with COVID. That's a bad argument. But the other points are fair because they're acknowledging, yes, we need well-ventilated spaces. Well-ventilated spaces are effective at reducing the impact of COVID virus spread. So that's good. So it's always very interesting because like every once in a while they throw in some good points, but still they're coming in with this very negative slant. When were cloths versus surgical masks used and by whom? Other than being well fitted, how were they worn? At some point in the 10-day period, would these symptomatic hairdressers have ceased to be contagious? We could go on, but the point is that this is not quality science. So yeah, I'd probably say that I wouldn't qualify this as a high level study. It would, truthfully, that would be kind of, this is a pretty disappointing one, but at the same time, you're trying to do science fast. Like, you have to recognize that, like, we're trying to get data as quick as possible so we can know, hey, do masks work? This is a quick, like, gut check. Like, all right, we found these people, we know they're sick. They were tracked in the barber shop having contact with people. All these people were wearing masks. No one got sick. All right, masks are effective. That's what this type of study is for. This is not to a down and dirty study to really get into it. It's more of people going, okay, we got to figure this out fast. We got to move fast. And that's what was done. So it was a good initial thing to be like, hey, yep, masks are good to go. Let's move on from there. Quick save. MMWR, which is apparently the CDC's journal, attempted to address some of the deficiencies from the Great Clip study and the Kansas study, which identified trends in the rolling average of new COVID cases in every county in the state from Kansas from June 1 to August 23rd, 2020. Once again, the graphs and trend line. So, okay, so I just realized in my brain. So the reason they're focusing on 2020 data so hard is because the lockdowns, the stay-at-home order was only for that 3 weeks in 2020. So that's why they're so heavily focused on the 2020 data. It just clicked in my brain. Because we didn't have stay-at-home orders after that 3-week period. We lifted them. So like that's why they're so heavily focused on the 2020. That makes sense, but again, it's like it's irrelevant. So once again, the graphs and trend lines seem to tell a compelling story. Rolling averages went up in both sets of counties before the implementation of the mandate, and then there was a split with counts continue to rise in non-mandated counties, but stabilizing and falling in mandated counties. So that, again, this is a quick and dirty thing you can do in science. Not everything is going to be a huge, well-done study, especially when you're trying to move fast and learn quick. So this is, again, compelling evidence that's saying, hey, look, we specifically put mandates in these counties. We didn't have mandates in these counties, and we saw that the counties with the mandates had a lower county infection rate increase compared to the ones that didn't have the mandates. And they had a higher rate. So assuming all other things are equal, that tells us that the mask mandates are effective. So again, this is showing us that yes, the masks work. So the study's authors concluded that the data from this countywide mask mandate appeared to have contributed to the mitigation of COVID-19 transmission in mandated counties, which it did. So once again, however, even moderately scientific scrutiny renders these conclusions suspect. So now, again, you have to put everything into perspective, and what they like, even though these are like not super rigorous, super high depth, super like awesome studies that I would want to like put in a little frame on my wall to just look at from time to time or something, like these are still good because they're getting us quick information so that we can make policy recommendations and know that these things have positive impacts. So again, this point doesn't really make sense. So the data shows that the 7-day rolling average was never higher in counties with no mask mandate for the entire period of the study. Hold on, let's try that again. So once again, however, even moderate scientific scrutiny renders this conclusion suspect. The data shows that the 7-day rolling average was never higher in counties with no mask mandate for the... It's never higher. Rather, the rolling averages appear to have exploded in mandate counties prior to the mandate and leveled off afterwards. These data raise questions that seem to confound even the study's authors. Why were the mask mandates counties higher in the first place? Were there other interventions like stay-at-home orders in place that could have also affected the rolling average? Are these substantial differences between the people in the 81 non-mandated counties versus the 24 mandated counties, where urban density or wealth taken into account? This study is too problematic. The study too is problematic. So let's go back up because once again, the graphs and trend lines. I can't see how both things can be true. I'm gonna have to pull this one up. I don't know what to look for. I guess I'll just highlight this yellow or blue. I'm gonna have to follow up with this one to actually look at the data, because what it's saying here is that, yeah, there's very clear established split, and then they're saying no, there is no split. Actually, the people in the masked areas did worse. So I'm gonna have to look at that. Finally, we get to the dummy study, where CDC scientists strapped various single and dual mask configurations on a pliable elastomeric head form that looks a lot like the head of a CPR dummy. It pointed it at another pliable elastomeric head form 6 feet away and tested the ability of various mask configurations to filter out a mixture of exhaled potassium chloride with particles. So this is literally just a standard test. That's how they do like an N95 test to make sure that the masks are filtering with 95% efficiency or higher. Is they use well, actually they use sodium chloride, so that's weird that's saying potassium chloride. They use NaCl particles, not KCl particles. So that's weird. That shouldn't be correct. I think they made a typo here. It should be sodium chloride. Anywho, so particles range from 100 to 7,000 nanometers in size. The study concluded that masks were effective at filtering out these particles, and that situations where both pliable elastomeric headforms were equipped with double masks, where cloth masks was worn over a surgical mask, or non-tucked surgical masks offered even greater protection, filtering out an impressive 96.4% and 95.9% of particles, respectively. There's a significant problem, however, with the analysis. The size of the COVID virus is approximately... So this is a bad faith argument, because we know that the COVID virus, while individually small, does not exist as a standalone. It can't exist as a standalone. RNA is very fragile. RNA viruses are very fragile. All right, I'm not going to go through that side of it, but just know that the COVID virus as an individual virion cannot exist alone. It has to exist within a droplet. If it dries out, it breaks and dies. It can't do its thing. So it needs to be existing in droplets, and these droplets can be very large droplets, or that you could see like when someone spittle, or they can be very small, where it's aerosolized droplets, little droplets that are floating in the air that are carrying virus particles. So this is a bad faith argument, because they're going to be saying that, oh, because the COVID virus is so small, the masks can't filter it out because the fibers are going to be larger than it. Well, no, that's not how it works. They're not existing as standalone things that are floating through the air. They're existing in droplets that have been aerosolized. And the droplets are larger than the fiber thing. I think it's like 70 microns, which would be doing the conversion to nanometers, like 70,000 nanometers, something like that, which is, as you can see, is much, much larger than would even be tested in the study. So still at best, this would fall within the, so 1,000 nanometers would be 1 micron. I'm pretty sure that, or 10. No, it'd be 1 micron. So like that would be like the smallest realm of aerosolized particles, and that the mask would still filter that out. They never enforced mask mandates in my county. I'm sorry about that. Still, at the best, this would fall within the bottom 1/7 of the tested particle sizes. Importantly, as we will explore in detail below, particles of this size are not droplets but aerosols, which can remain in the air for extended periods of time, provided they are not blown away or evaporated. The study did not specify what ratios of particle size were tested. It would be reasonable to expect that the smaller aerosol-type particles were the 3.4% and 4.1% of particles that went through both masks. No, it's not a reasonable assumption for what I just said. Additionally, testing various mask configurations on 2 dummy heads in a laboratory really can't tell us much about the protection offered by these masks in a real-world environment. It actually can. And we also have tests on people. That's how we do N95 fit testing, is you'll actually have a little sensor on the inside of the mask that'll be detecting the sodium chloride particles, and you have a sensor on the outside of the mask. So when they're blasting your face with the NaCl particles. You'll be breathing in, breathing out, and your mask will be in front of your face. And then they'll be detecting levels on the inside sensor and on the outside sensor. And that's how they determine how effective, how much is being filtered out. So again, and that's something that's been around for a very long time. That's stuff that's been studied well in depth. I'm not sure why the CDC specifically ran this thing. Maybe it was just to do like a replication study, because we've had this data for a very, very long time. It's very standard practice. It's part of N95 fit testing. So additionally, testing various mask configurations on 2 dummy heads in a lab can't really tell us much about protection. Human beings are not pliable, elastomeric head forms. Again, bad faith argument. We move, we talk, we eat, we sweat, we vary in age, we vary in size. Again, well-fitted N95 mask will be to your own head, your own face. Everyone's face is different. Everyone needs a different mask. Or a different mask is going to work best for everyone. So long as it's a well-fitted N95 mask, or a well-fitted mask in general, you're not going to have the problem. And in terms of beards, I've done some papers on that. Essentially, with an N95 mask, a 3mm beard or shorter will have no effect on the filter efficiency of the mask. Longer than that, you start to have sharp decreases. And when you get like a 10mm beard, centimeter beard, which is basically like a bushy mid-beard length, that's when you start to have significant decreases, where an N95 mask would drop down to about like 60% filtration efficiency. So basically your N95 would be the equivalent of a cloth mask or a surgical mask without on a person without facial hair. But what you can do is you can actually use like a elastic leg band and sort of like wrap and tie your beard nice and tight against your face. And then when you wear the N95 over that, you gain back the filter efficiency. So beards aren't an issue. Even big beards, there are things that we've shown, and that's stuff back in 2021. So again, that's not an issue. They've done studies on sweating in masks, and the sweat doesn't appear to have an effect on the seal. It doesn't, since masks are hydrophobic, they don't seem to have an effect on the filtration efficiency. Hydrophobic means they repel water. So again, these aren't good arguments. Besides this one right here, we vary in mask wearing behavior. So people that aren't wearing a mask or are wearing it inappropriately, like on their chin, on their foreheads, dangling off one ear, obviously your mask is not going to work for you. Importantly, perhaps we inhale, causing negative pressure behind our mask that's stuck in air through available gaps, provided there are any. All these factors may influence others on the effectiveness of masks for real human beings in the real world. So yeah, those are true things, but again, for all the reasons we already talked about, not really a problem. So these three are far from the only studies that the CDC has published on masks, but they are good examples of the type of flawed observational laboratory data that the CDC has published to justify its guidance. This is a quality problem, not a quantity problem. The number of published studies. So again, they're heavily focused on stuff that came out very, very early on in the pandemic, and this is ignoring the huge quantity of data that we had already, all the papers that we had on these things already. So the situation has gotten so convoluted with the CDC publishing thing that there is science on the science. A preprint posted in July 2023 concluded after reviewing 77 studies published by the CDC on the issue of masking that the CDC publications pertaining to masks drew positive conclusions about mask effectiveness over 75% of the time, despite only 30% testing masks and less than 15% having statistically significant results. They would have to show what they're talking about here. This is a bunch of garbage without putting it into context. So notice studies were randomized at over half drew casual conclusions. The level of evidence generated was low, and the conclusions drawn were most often unsupported by the data. Our findings raise concerns about the reliability of the journal for informing health policy. So yeah, the CDC probably shouldn't have their own journal, to be fair. Like, you need to have an entity that is as unbiased as can be, where you can have appropriate peer review prior to publication. So I'm not sure the CDC should be in charge of their own journal. If there are issues in the studies, I'm definitely going to look at that other one that they had mentioned earlier that's showing positive conclusions, but also showing the opposite of what the conclusions drawn were. That would be an interesting one for me to look at. But maybe that's a fair argument that CDC shouldn't have their own publication that's internally controlled, and things like that. So how does what should be the leading journal on infectious diseases in the world, sponsored by the US government in the midst of global pandemic, find itself seemingly unable to publish sound science on such a critical and controversial question? In this particular situation, the best way to describe the reliability of masks, especially the all-important question of whether to make children or mask children, would be to conduct a properly designed random. So this sounds good in theory, a randomized control study, but like, you have to remember what they're talking about. So again, this is unethical. You can't do this. You can't, because a randomized control study, you will have a control group that would be in this situation no masking, and then you had your test group that would be masking, and maybe you have different conditions of masks. Like you have a cloth mask group, a surgical mask group, a 95 group, and then you randomize people in the study, and then people are randomly put into control in all the different masking groups, and then you would run it like that and see, all right, how often do the people get infected, et cetera, et cetera. Again, this sounds good in theory, especially when you're dealing with children who can't consent to research because they're children. They can't fully understand the implications and the ramifications of it, of what they're consenting to. So first, children can't consent to be research subjects. Two, it's incredibly unethical to do that with a disease. You can't do a randomized control trial on people just to see what would happen. That's the whole point of like the Tuskegee syphilis studies and other studies like that, is that there was no therapeutic benefit. They just wanted to see what would happen. They were just experimenting on humans. And that's not something that's allowed in ethics, in bioethics. So again, that's not something that you can do. This is, if you had someone that was in ethics on this committee, call up Evan the bioethicist. But again, this is unethical. You can't do a randomized control trial on people because you would be allowing people to get sick with a virus when there are preventable means to stop them from getting the virus, and the virus can have very detrimental long-term consequences such as long COVID, disability, and death. So yeah, and the structure of a randomized controlled trial would cause for researchers to take a number of steps beyond what we see in the observational laboratory studies above, create a control group. So again, it's unethical. So I'm not really going to entertain this. Why not conduct one? Because it's unethical. It's human experimentation. It's against the Geneva Code. You can't do it. In order to do a randomized control trial, clinical trial, you need to have the equipoise in the question, and ultimately what would happen. What happens is that there were so many studies that demonstrated time and time again in the height of COVID transmission that masks were working to prevent transmission. And I'm not sure anybody would oppose a clinical trial because, in fact, there wasn't equipoise to the question anymore. In medicine, equipoise is definitely defined as a state of uncertainty as the balance of benefits and harms that may result from two or more therapeutic regimen, indicating the appropriateness of a randomized control trial. And for masking, that is not something that would be again, it's unethical. You can't, no one would allow this. In one sense, the director is correct outside her sandbox of the CDC publishing group. There are indeed randomized controlled trials that precisely address the question her agency refused to ask in the format, do masks work? Someone did this. Question mark. So we have the beginnings of an answer. The Cochrane Library is a UK nonprofit that specializes in the collection and synthesis of scientific research data. For anyone interested in using high quality information to make health decisions, much of this research is published in the form of meta-analyses. So again, that's not a randomized controlled trial. That's a meta-analysis. That's looking back. That's saying, based off of what we know, it's essentially a retrospective analysis. So that they're calling that a randomized control trial. It's not a randomized control trial. So we're Cochrane research analyzing way available scientific studies in order to form a conclusion on some issue of interest. In the world of medicine scientific research, Cochrane is considered the gold standard, respected for its careful and consideration and treatment of the topics it addresses. After examining available studies from around the world, including several all-important randomized control trials regarding the effectiveness of masks, I do not believe these exist. Because it's unethical. Here's what Cochrane's researchers concluded and published in January 2023, approximately 1 week before the congressional testimony of the CDC director we cited above. Gotta drink some water. There's uncertainty about the effects of face masks. The low to moderate certainty of evidence means our confidence in the effect estimate is limited, and that the true effect may be different from the observed effect estimate of the effect. The pooled results of randomized controlled trials did not show clear reduction in respiratory viral infection with the use of medical surgical masks. So that's very important. So we already know that surgical masks only have about a 65% filtration efficiency. That's very well documented. They're not well fit to the face. Again, I do not believe that there were randomized control trials with respiratory viral infections and face masks. That would be against the Geneva Convention. You'd basically be one of those lightning bolt people. That's not something that people would do. That's not something scientists would do. And again, they're saying that this was done with medical surgical masks, which would make sense if they were not being as effective. And there was no clear difference between the use of medical surgical masks between N95 P2 respirators and healthcare workers when used in routine care to reduce viral infection. That's not true. It's very well documented against the reverse, that N95s are very effective at reducing respiratory viral infection. Again, no one will do a randomized control trial on masking and viral infection because you would be accepting intentionally infecting the control group with a virus for the only intention of seeing what happens to them with zero therapeutic benefit. So the only benefit is to the researcher. There is no benefit to the people that you would be experimenting on in this sense. So again, a randomized control trial will not be ethical. Once again, we are not physicians, but we do not believe years of medical school, education, or advanced degrees required to read the paragraphs above as confirmation that there is indeed equipoise in the question of whether masks are an effective non-pharmaceutical intervention for COVID. There's no question that masks work. Apparently, you do need to have some medical school education or higher level education because what they are suggesting is eugenics. That's not okay. And they should, that when I make the little short video, I'm very much going to highlight this part right here because it's absolutely wild that this got said in writing. If the best meta-analysis we have says there needs to be more randomized control trials, someone should do those. They don't say that. That's not true. The NIH and CDC receive billions of our tax dollars every year to elucidate these important questions in public health for the American people. With all these resources at their disposal and given the importance of the questions, why did these agencies not just do the randomized control trials? Again, it's unethical. And masks, the efficacy of masks are not in question. Frankly, we do not believe equipoise, I don't know this word, equipoise had much to do with it. Rather, after reading between the lines of the scientific data involving the structure of the COVID virus and how it spreads, again, so how masks work, there's 4 or 5 different ways that they work. So small droplets are negatively charged. A mask is positively charged. It has positively charged fibers. So one way is static adherence to the surface of the mask. So basically these will float by and then they'll just cling to the outer surface through weak intermolecular forces. That's one way that viruses get filtered out. The second way is that viruses can penetrate into the mask and they'll get embedded in the fibers. A lot of masks have these cross-tangling of fibers, especially in N95s. They're so basically you have all these like interwoven fibers like this, and if there's like a little hole, they'll go in just a little bit and then they'll get caught in adjacent fibers. So that's another way. They get embedded within the mask, and when you breathe, you actually pull it a little bit further into the fibers where it gets really nice and embedded, so it's trapped within that first layer of the mask. And there's like 3 to 4 layers in a N95 mask. So there's electrostatic attraction, there's embedding of the fiber itself, there's basically flow around the mask. So there's airflow. So the virus can literally just go and completely miss us, just because of the aerodynamics of the mask itself. That's the third one. What's the fourth one? I don't know. Those are the major ones, but that I can remember off the top of my head. So like the fact that they're existing in droplets, tiny droplets, not individual virus. There's all these different ways that the masks work. There's like, they just work. I don't know how else to say it. So this claim is, where did I leave off? Right here. So frankly, we do not believe that Jose had much to do with it. Rather, after reading between the lines of the scientific data involving the structure of COVID virus and how it spreads, we believe at least some of the officials in these agencies were acutely aware that a properly conceived and administered randomized control trial where the effects of masking are isolated from the effects of other non-pharmaceutical interventions is likely to show that mask mandates, if not masks themselves, have little to no efficacy. That's false. This is, of course, would invite further criticism of the CC and other federal agents who champion these broad mask mandates and on the federal, state, and local agencies who codified and enforce them. So again, unethical. Masks are very effective. COVID does not exist as a virion. They exist in aerosolized droplets, which are bigger than the virion itself, and those are easily caught in the mask. So before explaining why we believe such a study would not show efficacy, we acknowledge the conventional wisdom that masks, which limit the outflow of fluids associated with respiration, should limit transmission of a respiratory virus like COVID. Viewed through that lens, the key message we said at the beginning of the section makes sense. Wearing masks limit droplets, and limiting droplets prevents viral spread. That analysis is not exactly wrong per se, it is just incomplete. So masks work 2 different ways. One is source control, which is what they're referring to here. Whereas if you are sick with COVID, a mask will prevent it from being spread outwards. And then for people that aren't sick with COVID that are wearing masks, they prevent further spread. So like if COVID is existing in the environment, you're around a person that's spreading it, it acts as another secondary barrier, a filter for your face. There are 2 reasons for this. The first comes down to the fact that humans are almost invariably imperfect mask wearers. Because of that's a good point that the CDC, I don't think they've ever released a video on this is a type of mask you should wear. This is how you should wear it. This is what a well-fitted mask looks like. And these are the resources for how you can get your mask for free. They never did that. So I think that's good point, even though that's not the point they were trying to make. They're saying people suck at it, so why bother, is their argument. But I think it's a very good point that the CDC never created an educational series surrounding this. So the COVID virus does not know we just sat down at a restaurant for lunch, or that we have a big speech to make, or that grandpa needs a hug. Don't give grandpa a hug, you don't want to kill grandpa. You can wear a mask and talk at the same time, believe it or not. Your voice can penetrate a mask. The sound waves can penetrate the mask, and you can talk with a mask on. Crazy. And not just that, people can hear you. And then restaurants, so fomite transmission through spittle, that is a threat, and that's why a lot of the restaurants were not allowed to do indoor dining, but pickup and outdoor dining was for those reasons. Even if we were to find the right kind of mask with exactly the right kind of fit, shave every day, and change filters diligently, it would still be virtually impossible for us to conduct our affairs with the rigidity necessarily to receive the full measures of benefits of the masks would provide to a CPR dummy in a laboratory. So again, this is just a logical statement. Because again, you don't have to shave. We've had alternatives for this from the very beginning. Changing filters, I guess that would be if you're wearing a full face respirator, so changing those filters regularly, not that big of a deal. But again, you could use a mask, throw it out, use a new mask so that's not contaminated and clean. So no, this whole thing is just an outright farce. And then the CDC director argued in February 2023 testimony that one of the primary obstacles to an effective randomized control trial involving mask wearing was that it would be difficult to get study participants to adhere to the protocols. That's not the major thing. The major thing is that this would be unethical. And also, there's protocols for people that do not follow the procedure, where you're allowed to eliminate them from the data pool if they do not hit a certain target. That's a very established thing in science. So just write that into your study, that if people do not wear a mask 80% of the time, then you don't use their data. She had a good point, but we offer a counterpoint. If the protocols are such that a large number of study participants who are compensated for their time and effort in a randomized control trial cannot adhere to them, what use will they be to the rest of us? And again, like, they're suggesting that, okay, we're just gonna let some people get a level 3 biopathogen because we just want to know if masks work. We just want to know. And like, that's where the unethical part comes in, because you're like, screw those people. I just want to know if it's good for me. So the second reason is less well known, but perhaps equally significant. Unlike many other respiratory diseases, it appears that COVID's primary mode of transmission is via aerosol. So this is a huge misunderstanding that people make, in that COVID is droplet based, but the droplets can either be large scale droplets like spittle, or it can be aerosolized droplets. An aerosol is very small droplet particles that have the ability to linger in the air. COVID can do both. It's not one or the other, it's both. To understand why this matters, we must delve into the science of aerosols. As we mentioned above, humans emit respiratory ejecta of various sizes, all of which, so again, right there, we eject large droplets and small droplets, some that can linger in the air, some that get spit out and can hit places and linger there. COVID can exist in both of those. So all of which could theoretically contain some concentration of COVID virus, and all of which are subject to environmental effects like gravity and air circulation of its size. The largest droplets measuring some 42,000 nanometers drift to the ground within seconds, and are therefore unable to travel more than a few feet. But if you touch those things, that's called fomite. That's a contact transmission. So like you would touch things, pick your nose, pick your teeth, stick your finger in your mouth to go pop. Like all these different things are ways that you could get the COVID from your hands and your touch onto your face, or like if you like that even. So you can't rule out droplets. It's part of it, but it's also the aerosol part. Particles from 9,000 to 1,900 nanometers can hang in the air for anywhere from a few minutes to a half hour, like mist. So again, I think 1,000 nanometers is a micrometer. Is 1 micron. 1 micrometer is 1,000 nanometers. So again, this is acknowledging the fact that droplets are larger than like virions, are larger than virus. So then you can have multiple virions that exist within a small aerosolized droplet, and these are what actually come into contact. It's not these free-floating virus particles, it's these aerosolized droplets. So it's weird that like the information is there, they're just not making mental connections. Or what is actually happening is they're trying to twist the information in a way that makes it factually untrue. Particles of 400 nanometers or smaller can hang in the air for hours, provided they do not evaporate, as they certainly would in sunny exterior areas. COVID itself is approximately 90 nanometers. It requires some liquid in order to not desiccate before it reaches a new host. Precisely. That's the whole thing right there. The whole kit and caboodle. But normal respiration by an infected person could produce a number of small air particles that are surprisingly persistent in the right environmental conditions. The most recent numbers we have is about 1,000 virions are shed a minute in aerosolized droplets, and it only takes about 100 virions to infect someone based off of Homeland Security reports from the United States. So that means you can get infected pretty quickly, on average. But normal respiration by an infected person can produce blah, blah, blah. So more over time would be a factor. A few seconds in such an environment might not be enough time to build up the viral load necessarily to cause an infection. But as the number of respiratory expressions increase, so does the number of droplets inhaled in the viral load. So during the last one of these 2 days ago, I was saying that time and dose dependency are the two major factors for COVID, how long you're exposed, and then how high the concentration is for how long. Those are the two major ways that you can get infected, or the two major factors in you getting infected. The concept of aerosol-based transmission of COVID is not a new idea. We were able to trace the earliest research papers discussing it to around mid-2020. Because we knew from nearly the very beginning that COVID was airborne. They also discussed in detail the considerations that would arise from different daily activities like riding in cars, planes, or even just having normal conversations. For whatever reason, however, the concept of aerosol-based spread never came to significantly inform public health science communication. The word aerosol and its intended properties should have become part of the zeitgeist, the common information. People should have been told that masks, like any protective device, have limitations. Surgical and cloth masks have limited utility against aerosol particles. Exactly. Well-fitted N95 will protect. Nope, that's factually accurate. Well-fitted N95 mask will protect not only you, but all the people that you're around as well. You do want to keep the mask dry, though, to the best of your abilities. It would have underscored the minimal utility of the ubiquitous plastic shielding that persists in the retail and food sector today. So they're referring to those barriers that were concocted. So again, it's droplets and aerosolized transmission. So that is really good at blocking droplets, those plastic barriers that they put up, such as like cash registers and banks and food service sectors. So that was good for stopping that. And it's also good for stopping the airflow of the aerosolized particles, which will reduce the exposure duration of the person that you're interacting with. So they are still good. Where aerosol-based spread taken into account, we believe the CDC guidance cited at the top of the section would look very different. This incomplete, inaccurate advice is not without its own potential consequences. High-risk individuals who have been misled into believing masks offer more protection than they did may not have been encouraged to do activities they should not have done or go to places they should not have gone. So, okay, so people who get sick with COVID may have persisted in their daily activities, and it may place belief that wearing a mask, even an N95, would protect those around them from potential transmission. So, while not a 100% guarantee, if you're wearing an N95, you have a 95 to a 98% reduction in your transmitted virus to people around you. So there is a significant risk reduction. So I feel like they're belittling that with this statement. I don't agree with this statement. Isolation bubbles that appeared around exterior restaurant tables in some states may have increased the risk of viral spread between whoever was inside the bubble by limiting sources of potential ventilation. That is true. That is true. So if you recall, some of those restaurants got like those mouse balls, blew them up, and had people sit in there. So if you're going to a place with another person and you are in those little bubbles, you could, it's basically a guarantee that if the person you're with is infected with COVID, you will get infected with COVID too in that little space because of the lack of air circulation. It's just basically going to build up that virus level over time. So that's a very high level. But they're still good they were still pretty good at preventing, like if there's a bunch of other people around you from that shared airspace. So there's a valid point in there, but it's not really the point that they're truly making. So for that matter, congregating in open air spaces should have been encouraged back in 2020, not shunned. No, because I think what they're referring to is like church services and things like that, because a lot of churches try to keep bringing their congregations together, even though they were told not to during that period of time, that 3 weeks. And a lot of people got sick because they were going to these things and sharing participating in the religious ceremonies where they were drinking from the same cup, eating from the same source. And there was lots of documented cases where the priests infected nearly all of their congregation because they were sick with COVID and they're touching everything and breathing on everything. So yeah, it should have been shunned, even though that's not the right description of that. It should have been discouraged. So, and it was discouraged. So, COVID's primary mode of transmission being aerosolized. So again, they're trying to say that it's like only aerosolized, and that's what they're leaning as. So they're saying, oh, all these droplet-based protection measures don't do anything. Well, no, because its primary mode for infection we're considering to be aerosolized COVID particles, which is likely true, but there's also the secondary mode of the droplets. Like if someone kisses you or spits on you. So COVID's primary mode of transmission being aerosolized also sheds light on another oft criticized area of CDC advice not updated since July 2020, which reads as follows. Social distancing, also called physical distancing, means keeping a safe space between yourself and other people who are not from your household. To practice social or physical distancing, stay at least 6 feet, about 2 arms lengths, from other people who are not from your household in both indoor and outdoor spaces. So the farther you are away, the farther you are away from a source of virus production, the less potential virus you would be inhaling. So they're still good measures, but like since it's also airborne, these virus particles that are existing in droplets in the air can spread. So it's not completely adequate, especially if you're in a poorly ventilated space. So COVID-19 spreads mainly among people who are in close contact within about 6 feet for a prolonged period. Spread happens when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks, and droplets from their mouth or nose are launched into the air and land in the mouths or noses of people nearby. The droplets can also be inhaled into the lungs. The CDC's 6-foot guidance was based off the prevalence of SARS-CoV-1 on a single airline flight in 2003. The WHO based its recommendation of 3 feet between people on even older research from influenza in the 1930s. Neither are based on the particularities of COVID. The problem, once again, is that when one is dealing with an aerosol, the primary concern is not the distance between people, it is whether one is dealing with an interior and exterior space, and an interior space where there is sufficient air filtration to prevent the accumulation of aerosol clouds containing COVID virus. So that was a big old mouthful, but essentially it does not disprove it because it does not disprove it, the 6 feet thing, because it's still going to be effective. The closer you are to a person, the more your little cloud of particles, if you're a contagious person with COVID, you have a little cloud of particles that is constantly being generated around you. So the closer you are to someone else, the higher that cloud of particles is going to be, and the further away you are going to be from that person, the lower the particle cloud is going to be. And yeah, there are factors like airflow and filtration and things like that that will affect that and help to improve, decrease the risk, improve the benefits. Not the right way to say that, but decrease the risk. So again, this does not disprove like the distancing measures. An enclosed space for a distance of 6 feet or 60 feet is not going to make any difference. That's factually inaccurate for the reasons I just said. By fall of 2020, there was peer-reviewed, published scientific data available containing all these facts. Public policy should have been focused on taking advantage of exterior spaces. Instead, many states and municipalities did the opposite, closing parks, taping up playgrounds, and confining people to interior spaces where viral transmission was more likely with stay-at-home orders. But again, if people are staying at home and not visiting other people in their homes, then there is not going to be the viral spread. So the logic isn't logicking once more. So not only was most of the information involving aerosol-based spread available in 2020, there was also a contemporaneous large and growing body of scientific research showing the effectiveness of high-efficiency particulate air, HEPA, and other air exchange and filtration systems in limiting COVID spread in indoor settings. So yeah, HEPA's great. There's Corsi Rosenthal boxes, which was something that happened a lot. I actually have one right behind me. There's my Corsi Rosenthal box. So yeah, so like that's a great thing, but that doesn't make indoor spaces safe. One peer So planes, for example, which have robust air circulation systems, had unusually low spread given the proximity of passengers to one another in flights. Hospital transmission was also low. Even the CDC's journal did a study on air filtration systems in hospitals reducing transmission. One peer-reviewed paper detected 0 COVID pathogens in one of its ward after installing an air UV filter, but detected the virus in the air both before those filters were turned on and after they were shut down again a week later. So yeah, that's showing that these things do work. Having the Swiss cheese model, multiple layers of mitigation. But detected virus in the air, both before and after. Perhaps instead of runs on hand sanitizer, toilet paper, and N95 masks, there should have been runs on HEPA filters. So again, they're trying to say like, oh, we should have only invested it in air filtration. But again, these are stacking measures. You can do hand sanitizer. I don't know what the toilet paper is in there for, but you can do hand sanitizer, N95 mask, and HEPA filter, and UV filtration. And this will be stacking mitigation measures, which is going to dramatically reduce the risks. So to their credit, the CDC website does contain significant information about the importance of air filtration in indoor spaces. Our critique is that the relationship between this information and the social distancing guidelines should have been much more of a matter of public discourse. Not really. Science is science. The public doesn't really. The public isn't going to be able to set guidelines. You have to have research and science and understanding, which these people clearly do not. And the guidelines should have been updated to reflect our emergence of understanding of how the disease moves in indoors versus outdoor spaces. Institutional public health experts had the science at their disposal, but continue to stick to advice that bore only a cursory resemblance to the contrary scientific evidence presented in the emerging data. That, coupled with heavy-handed directives from state and local actors, essentially turned scientific inquiry, the very basis of which is asking questions and doubting priors, into a form of civil disobedience. The world could have had a very different approach, where people understood that the protection offered by masks was at best limited and speculative, but the outdoors could have essentially been at their disposal. So I don't really know what they're referring to here, because I distinctly recall the CDC putting out statements that if you're going to be like interacting with other people, try to have your events outdoors, try to do things outdoors. So that's not true. And then masks work. Masks are very effective. So that's a false statement. So many more quality air filtration systems could have been installed. So this is a very, very good point. Like, we had funding, we had billions of dollars of funding. Why was none of this allocated to improving air filtration systems in hospitals and schools and public buildings and government buildings? But also, these are stacking mitigation measures. They're saying, as opposed, so like, they're not saying do this and all these other things. They're saying only do this. We should have only done this. We should not have done plastic shields. We should not have done social distancing. We should not have done hand sanitizing. We should not have done masking. And that's all incorrect. It's this and this and this and this and this. So in conclusion, this brings us back to our original question: how did these non-pharmaceutical interventions affect the overall risk presented by the COVID virus? With respect to lockdowns, again, they use these words very interchangeably, but it's not lockdowns. It was a 3-week stay-at-home order. There does exist a pattern in the data showing a short-term stabilization of case growth that persists until the lockdown is lifted, followed by months or even years of excess mortality that can partially be attributed to collateral consequences concentrated in the groups at lowest risk from COVID disease. There is a case to be made that these lockdowns enabled others in high-risk groups to bridge the gap. Until 2021, when they had access to vaccines, a subject which this grand jury will undoubtedly examine in future presentments. Oh God. On average, however, when one includes all age groups, lockdowns were not a good trade. So I've very thoroughly broken this down, and they made no good arguments. Comparative data showed that jurisdictions that held to them tended to end up with higher overall excess mortality. Show us the numbers, baby. I don't see any numbers, and you didn't show us any numbers, so you're just talking out of your butthole. So this is especially evident when compared to jurisdictions that targeted their protective efforts toward the highest risk groups instead of mandating large-scale extended periods of quarantine for everyone. Did they just suggest and describe a lockdown? Hold on. This is especially evident when compared to jurisdictions that targeted their protective efforts towards the highest risk groups instead of mandating large-scale extended periods of quarantine for everyone. It sounds like in this sentence they're suggesting that instead of focusing on just like doing measures to protect the elderly and immunocompromised, that we should have a lockdown, a widespread extended quarantine for everybody, which is a lockdown in so many words. Effectively, lockdowns traded the immediate welfare of a smaller, affluent, well-represented group of older Americans who could afford to stay home for the longer-term welfare of a larger, less affluent, poorly represented group of children, teens, 20, 30, and 40 somethings who could not. If anything, the result of this was a modest benefit to the former group at the expense of the later. So it sounds like what they're actually advocating for in this sentence, and this is 100% not their intention, which is hilarious. They're saying that, you know what we should have done? We should have had a lockdown for everybody, just like China did, a zero COVID lockdown, which is hilarious because they 100% did not intend to write it this way, but this is how the words they wrote work. That's how they're structured. If anything, the result of this was So with respect to masks, we have never had sound evidence of their effectiveness against COVID transmission. That's false. In the form of reliable randomized control trials. So again, that's unethical. Demonstrates statistically significant benefits. And also, not only is that unethical, but the time to conduct an appropriate randomized control trial is typically a year at an accelerated pace. So you would be allowing, if you're saying no one else has mitigation measures, we're only going to focus on this randomized control trial. And once we get the results of this randomized control trial, we'll mandate this for everyone. Then you're just saying, all right, nobody, you're just saying, let it rip until we know, which is not how you do things. You're supposed to take the most conservative approaches to protect the highest number of people, and then you can learn along the way. And then when you know better, you do better. But what they're essentially implying is we should have not done anything until we knew, until we have this very randomized control study. So again, in that year time where they would be theoretically running this randomized controlled trial, all these people would be getting sick and dying and getting disabled and getting long COVID and having all of these long-term issues, all for the sake of them being beyond confident that, okay, masks do work, coming to the conclusion that we already know is the correct conclusion. So that's the other side of the unethical argument. So there have always been legitimate questions around the impracticality of individual adherence to mask recommendations, but once it becomes clear that the primary transmission vector of COVID was via aerosol, the potential efficacy was further diminished. It is not, is actually strengthened, especially and what I'm referring to is well-fit N95 respirator. So that's false. And individual adherence to mask recommendations, if you tell people to do it and you actually enforce it, people will do it. That's been very well established. If you give people the option, then people won't do it. Public health agencies failed to adequately explain this important distinction to the American public in favor of a broad mask recommendation that did not make nearly enough distinction between the types of masks available and put those. So this is, again, a fair argument because the CDC never was like, hey, this is how you can pick out a mask. These are the companies where you can get a mask. This is where we're going to set up mask fit testing centers. This is where, this is how an N95 works, showing us, hey, look, this is how an N95 works. This is an NACL test, and how we do mask fit studies. And this is a person going through a mask fitting test. And these are the things you want to watch out for. And these are the things that you'll have to do if you have a small head or a big head or an average size head, if you have a really large pointy nose or a flat nose, etc. If you don't have ears, the CDC never did that, and that is an incredibly valid critique. Well-financed federal agencies chose to fill the discourse with flawed observational and laboratory studies. They did not. That is also false. Hiding behind their conclusions of no equipoise. I'm guessing it's equipoise.
Equipoise.
Equipoise. Okay. Hiding behind their conclusion of no equipoise to avoid the potential embarrassment of the public health advice they championed being invalidated by evidence. is not invalidated. It has not been invalidated. Likewise, the aerosol-based spread of COVID changes the equation with respect to social distancing. It does not. It is not nearly as important how far away people are. That's false from one another as it is whether they are in an interior or exterior environment. The major thing there is airflow, air filtration, in addition to air stagnation. So if you have areas where the air is stagnant, it can cause an issue. And I guess looping back to those plastic walls, those can actually cause some issues by creating zones of air stagnation. So making sure you accommodate for those types of things is a fun, important note. But distance is still a factor. It's still a factor. They did not demonstrate that it was ruled out. 6 feet is typically the max distance a droplet will fly, like a heavy droplet that would fall. But that's where the recommendation is coming from, or it's beyond the max distance of that a heavy droplet will fall. So aerosolized droplets can go farther and last longer, but it's still a good recommendation. The further you are away from people, the less viral load you will be exposed to, the less viral cloud you'll be exposed to. So even today, this important information is missing from the CDC's social distance guidelines. There's a lot to say about the CDC's guidelines that are completely inadequate, but it's for people like the ones that wasted 8 months writing this interim report, which is the reason why they're so poor. As for their effect on overall COVID risk, we cannot ignore the fact that these non-pharmaceutical interventions were not administered based on the best available scientific data. That's false. In fact, many public health recommendations and their attendant mandates departed significantly from scientific research. They did not. That was contemporaneously available to everyone, individuals, scientists, corporations, governments alike. Often this research was ignored by institutional policymakers. Again, you did not show anything that refuted anything that was suggested or any practice that was done. Occasionally, it was even attacked. It is a sad state of affairs when something as simple as following the science constitutes to an act of heresy, but here we are. I would argue the opposite is happening, where the science is being attacked by people that don't understand the science. Importantly, while some of these non-pharmaceutical interventions may have shifted risk to later in time or from one group to another, or had some speculative efficacy against viral spread when used in perfect laboratory conditions, comparative evidence suggests that they did not significantly change the overall risk profile presented by the COVID virus in terms of excess death, especially once collateral consequences are taken into consideration. Wow, they don't. I was kind of expecting a list of literature references and citations at the bottom. Not there. Don't exist. So yeah, that's the end of that. So it completely tore it apart. We got 4 hours of this. What I'll do next, probably over the weekend, is I'll create a short video breaking down everything that we dissected, all of the major points that stuck out, to share with you all. But yeah, we did it. We completely tore apart this illegitimate panel's findings. Fun. Take that, Florida. All right. Have a good one, everybody.